Michael, I'd like to start the conversation with you. This was a very big team effort, as it often is in high-profile cases like this. I wonder if you might take your expertise as a former prosecutor and kind of break down for us and our audience what exactly the role each of these people plays, the SEC, CFTC, DOJ, FBI, all of them, and how they're going to move forward in this kind of a case.
Well, there's certainly collaboration amongst the regulatory entities, that is the CFTC and the SEC, with the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District. However, the Southern District really takes the lead because they have the access and the ability to use the grand jury, which allows them the opportunity to hold proceedings secretly. In fact, this ultimately was a sealed indictment, and I expect there'll be ongoing portions of the investigation that will remain outside of the public's view. So the CFTC and the SEC play a very important role. However, it's the U.S. Attorney's Office that takes the lead in these types of cases.
Okay, so Kate, it was just in this hour, 24 hours ago, that we were asking you about why Sam Bankman-Fried was appearing virtually in front of what was supposed to be his appearance before the House committee involving the investigation into FTX. And we kind of know why, because we understand that he's going through an extradition process right now in the Bahamas. Can you take us through what the movements have been like so far and what exactly has been said in today's hearings with the current FTX CEO who's in charge of kind of reorganizing everything?
Sure. So we just heard, Dom, from the acting SEC director, essentially that this started last Wednesday. The charges were approved. It's a longer process. Sam Bankman-Fried was eventually arrested last night in the Bahamas. So that was in coordination with U.S. law enforcement. So it makes the idea that he may have been nervous about an arrest if he had come back here on U.S. soil, especially relevant. And that's what we were hearing from legal experts for the reasoning behind it, a Zoom hearing testimony versus appearing in front of Congress in person, which we did not see today. Sam Bankman-Fried, for obvious reasons, now did not testify. We did hear from John Ray, who is now the CEO of FTX and is in charge of restructuring. He took a very calm, intense tone, really did not parse his words at all. He said that, talked about mismanagement, talked about some of the issues that went on at FTX. And it really did align with what we just heard from those multiple agencies who seem to be working quite closely and coordinating on this effort. We also just heard essentially that they haven't said if they're going to bring charges against anyone else, but they say they're not done. So it was sort of a call to action. If anybody had information, if anybody wanted to go and work with law enforcement, or they said if you were a part of this and you haven't reached out to us yet, make sure you do before we reach out to you. So there's a little bit of a warning shot there and a shot across the bow for those who may be involved and may have not spoken to federal prosecutors yet.
Michael, there are some reports he might fight extradition. What are his odds of success?
His odds of success are absolutely none. He will ultimately be extradited, but the process does allow for delay. It's a process that can take anywhere from 12 months up to 3 years because there are numerous appeals that are built into the extradition procedures that just are rampant with delay. So unless he agrees to be extradited and waives his extradition rights, he's not going to be on U.S. soil for a while.
Michael, we know that he has not waived those rights, so he is going to fight this in court in the Bahamas right now. And so if this really is a 1 to 3 year process, what exactly does that do to the momentum of the investigation? Or does this give law enforcement in the U.S. even more time, more time to build up a very solid case against SBF?
Well, first of all, he can waive his extradition rights at any point, so we'll just have to see how that plays out. But ultimately, slowing down a case like this where you expect at some point there will be other pleas that will be reached and other people will come forward and be charged is going to be a benefit for the prosecution.
A benefit for the prosecution. So do you think he'd be a flight risk?
I think any judge is going to look at him as a flight risk, given the fact that there are billions of dollars of assets that are still unaccounted for that could be anywhere in the world. There's really going to be no bond condition absent placing him in custody that's going to assure that he is going to reasonably appear in Manhattan.
Kate, one of the other complicating factors in this, and something that CNBC has been reporting on, is the relationship between the Bahamas law enforcement, the courts there, versus ours here. There's a great story up on CNBC.com right now detailing the near $250 million worth of real estate that Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX had amassed in the Bahamas, and how there's a battle brewing between the Bahamas courts and Delaware courts here in the U.S. with regard to the bankruptcy of FTX. How complicated does even the cross-border and cross-legal system process become, given what's happening right now with SBF and this particular slate, if you will, of charges?
So in the beginning, when this bankruptcy filing started, that was one of the big battles, was whether it was going to be Chapter 15 in New York, which would have allowed and acknowledged more of a global structure and more oversight in Bahamas for unwinding this, versus Chapter 11, which ended up being the outcome. It's all happening in Delaware. But we have had a little bit of pushback from Bahamas, and they challenged what John Ray said earlier when he was testifying. They do seem to want some sort of oversight, including, like you mentioned, real estate clawbacks. And they have said, we're cooperating on the arrest, but they do want some sort of ownership over this. He may very well have violated laws in the Bahamas as well. So you have these sort of dueling jurisdictions here that makes it way more complicated. And legal experts I've spoken to, you talk about the analogies of either Madoff or a Theranos situation where, or even an Enron that John Ray has worked on himself, that those are complicated, but they don't have the cross-border aspect. They don't have the cryptocurrency aspect. So that muddies the water a little bit in terms of unwinding all of this. The fact that it's not only in Bahamas, it's Antigua, and then there's 130 or so affiliated entities, many of which are global. They're all over the world, Europe, Africa, you name it. This company had tentacles really in every jurisdiction you can think of.
Michael, what did you think of his strategy to try to use this kind of media apology tour to garner some public support or forgiveness? And what do you think is likely to happen from here if we are no longer perhaps going to hear from him the way that we have, or maybe we will?
Well, first of all, what I thought of it was it's kind of the emperor has no clothes. I mean, it was a fictional attempt at some form of contrition, but as we know, these cases are built not only on the ridiculous statements of the individuals who are the targets, but also upon evidence of the actual criminal acts. And as Mr. Ray outlined this morning before the committee, this was a company that had no true governance. There were lies and deceit that I'm sure multiple witnesses and electronic emails are going to detail. And despite Mr. Fried's protestations, his strategy was doomed for failure from the start.
And Michael, before we let you go, from your expert standpoint, having been a federal prosecutor at one point, if you look at this case as it's developing, we don't know the full details yet, as it's developing, and you put it face to face with, say, Bernie Madoff, or you put it next to Enron and some other high-profile fraud cases, how big is this? How does it rate compared to some of the other big frauds in U.S. history?
Well, it certainly rates amongst those cases in terms of the amount of loss that we're dealing with. And I think the important message is, as has been said, this is a fraud case. It's not really about the crypto per se. It's an old story that's been written before. This is about lies, deceit, and political influence.
All right. Thank you very much to Michael Zweiback, also Kate Rooney as well for her reporting. We appreciate it.